How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather 100,000, and in this video, of course, we're going to talk about Invest 98L, which likely will become Hurricane Hermine in the very near future, where the Caribbean as well as the United States could experience major impacts associated with potential Hurricane Hermine, where potential Hurricane Hermine could become a major hurricane as it continues to head further westward. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. So let's begin by taking a look at the water vapor imagery for Invest 98L, which is likely to become a tropical storm within the next 24 hours. And now we're finally beginning to see an area of thunderstorm activity right around the Venezuela coast, where now we're beginning to see a little bit more convection than we have been seeing over the past several days. And you could probably tell that there's still a strong northerly upper level flow that's drifting the clouds further westward, which has been hindering this storm from really developing into a tropical storm over the past several days. However, these upper level winds are expected to subside as a result of Hurricane Fiona that's moving fast towards the north, which will force a lot of that outflow away from Invest 98L, and that would allow for the upper level winds to be a lot weaker, for this storm to organize itself a little bit more and potentially undergo rapid intensification as it heads further westward. But as of right now, it's dealing with moderate wind shear. The clouds are drifting towards the west. However, now we're beginning to see convection as the storm is becoming a little bit more vertically aligned between the mid levels and the low levels of the atmosphere, to where now we're beginning to see a central area of convection where likely our center of circulation will develop, and we're likely to see Tropical Storm Hermine in the very near future within, I'm saying, the next 24 hours, over the next several hours. So taking a look at the wind shear map as of right now, and of course these are the stronger northerly upper level winds I've been talking to you guys about over the past several days. This is as a result of Hurricane Fiona, where there's an upper level high aloft just in the upper levels of the atmosphere of Fiona that's forcing a lot of that outflow further southward, to where it's causing a stronger amount of wind shear over Invest 98L. But you see, just to the west, the wind shear becomes light, and as Hurricane Fiona continues to move northward, that northerly wind shear won't be much of an issue anymore for Invest 98L. So we're likely, Invest 98L is likely to undergo rapid intensification, and we're likely to see a hurricane and potentially a major hurricane as it heads into the Western Caribbean. Now, taking a look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook, we do see that there's a high 90% chance this develops within the next 48 hours into a tropical depression or tropical storm. So it's pretty much inevitable at this point we will see Tropical Storm Hermine, and most likely Hurricane Hermine, and potentially a major hurricane in our hands as it heads into the Western Caribbean. Now, taking a look at what the GFS model is stating as of the latest 18Z run for today, September 22nd, and we do see that the GFS model still wants to rapidly intensify this, where it wants to drop this pressure down to 963 millibars, as the GFS model has been the more lenient one on rapidly intensifying this. So far, the storm hasn't intensified as quickly as GFS model anticipated over the past several days, because if we were to take a look at the prior runs, the GFS model already wanted to develop Invest 98L to tropical storm status at this time today. But of course, we aren't seeing that, as GFS model was a little bit too biased on strengthening this rather quickly. So there could be that possibility that over the next several days, GFS model might have a little bit too strong of a bias of rapidly intensifying this. But either way, even if the GFS model isn't the correct scenario, the European model still wants to develop Invest 98L potentially into a major hurricane, where we do see that both of the computer models are very similar when it comes to strengthening, because we still see a 981 millibar storm just to south of Cuba, and if I were to continue to move forward, we see probably a major hurricane make landfall somewhere around southern Florida. And comparing that to the GFS model, the GFS model wants to take this storm a little bit further westward, to where more so impacts the western coast of Florida and the Florida panhandle. So there's still uncertainty with the forecast. However, I'd say the certainty has definitely risen for today when it comes to whether or not we're going to experience the United States impacts, because this storm isn't very far off anymore when it comes to making landfall or directly impacting the United States. Because if I were to show you guys this run, you see that we have potential Hurricane Hermine just off the Florida coast, and it is 156 hours from now, so 6 days out. There's still, of course, a lot of time to iron out the forecasts over the next 6 days, but it's still definitely more certain than what we've been forecasting over the past several days, where this storm was over 8 days out when it comes to bringing direct impacts to the United States. So certainty has certainly risen, but there's still uncertainty regarding the track forecast, because the GFS model, of course, wants to take this further westward and a little bit stronger than the European model, while the European model wants to take a landfall towards southern Florida. So we're definitely going to need to see which one's the correct one. Like I said, what really will determine the path of this storm is how quickly this strengthens, because like I said yesterday, if this storm strengthens a little bit more quickly than anticipated, then it's more likely that the stronger northerly upper level winds will play more of a factor when it comes to steering this storm, because of course when a storm's stronger, the cloud tops are a lot taller, which would force the upper level winds to manipulate the storm more, because the storm is a lot taller for the upper level winds to push the storm towards a certain direction. So if this storm ends up a little bit stronger, then the northerly upper level winds will force us a little bit further southward before turning northward, which would mean that most likely this storm would take a westward track closer to the Gulf of Mexico. And while pretty much a lot of the ensemble members today want to bring this towards Florida, towards the western Gulf of Mexico, I still wouldn't rule out the chance that we could see that forecast shift depending on how strong this intensifies. And of course, another thing is the steering flow, because there's going to be a ridge that's going to steer this, and there's expected to be a big trough that's going to dip down to the United States later during the week, because here's this ridge that's going to steer Invest 98L towards the west, potential Hurricane Hermine, and then like I said, there's that big trough I've been talking to you guys about. So depending on how far south that trough dips, if it dips a little bit earlier and if it's a little stronger than anticipated, then we could expect this to turn northward to where Florida would get more impacts. But if this ridge doesn't end up being as strong and doesn't move as south as quickly, then we're more likely to see a track a little bit further westward. So we're going to need to pay close attention to how the steering currents build over the next several days, because that'll determine the track forecast for this storm. Now, in terms of the strength forecast, so unfortunately it's not looking good, because all signs are pointing towards this disturbance rapidly intensifying as soon as it hits the Western Caribbean, because like I've been saying, the wind shear is expected to subside as this continues to head further westward, because we have Hurricane Fiona that's going to move northward, which would force the strong outflow winds away from Invest 98L for this to have an open opportunity to rapidly intensify in the Western Caribbean. That's what the GFS model exactly does, where it does want to strengthen this to a scary low 934 millibar hurricane, which is easily a category 5 hurricane. Now, of course, the GFS model has been a little bit too biased when it comes to rapidly intensifying this, so I'd say there is a higher, more likely than not, that the GFS model is overestimating how much a storm will strengthen. However, it's still likely that we'll see at least a major hurricane enter the Caribbean and potentially the Gulf of Mexico into next week, based on all the factors we're seeing, such as the light wind shear and of course not a lot of dry air. So if I were to show you guys the relative humidity in the mid levels of the atmosphere, we're expecting to see there won't be much dry air at all, where we do see that the dry air won't be an inhibiting factor. However, there could be some good news, because that could maybe inhibit this storm as it heads further northward, because like I said, that big trough that's going to move through the United States, of course, with a big cold front behind it comes a lot of stable and dry air. So potentially we could see maybe a good amount of dry air that could entrain this storm just before landfall to weaken it significantly, hopefully. But at this point, it seems like the storm's going to be too strong. So at any point where this makes landfall, it likely will bring major impact. It's so uncertain where it's going to make landfall, but I'd say Florida, especially, you need to be on high alert at this point. I wouldn't say prepare now until the forecast becomes a little bit more certain, but you need to pay close attention to this because a landfall is becoming more and more imminent. There's still, I'd say the best case scenario is that this moves completely to the east of Florida and doesn't really impact the United States. That's certainly still a possibility. We just need to see if this storm, let's say, remains weak enough to where it could, to where the surface level winds would steer this further northward to the point, and it could be to the point where this trough dip will be big enough to where this could steer this mainly off the coast, which would certainly be the best case scenario. And the European model, while it doesn't want to bring that scenario, it's pretty close to wanting to take this just off the coast of Florida by how quickly this turns north. While it does make landfall, there's still that possibility this could stay out to sea, which is certainly the best case scenario. But at this point, it seems a little bit more likely that it should impact somewhere on land, maybe Florida or maybe the Western Gulf of Mexico. So uncertainty with the forecast, but I'll keep you guys updated. But at this point, it seems like we're going to see a major hurricane in our hands, and I'd say United States impacts are more likely, and direct impacts are becoming increasingly likely at this point. So you need to be on high alert, especially in Jamaica, Cuba, as well as the Gulf Coast at this time. Now, taking a look at what the ensemble members are stating, and we do see a decent amount of European ensemble members wanting to take this sort of just off the coast. However, we still do see that it isn't far enough off the coast to where the East Coast will not experience much impacts, because we still do see the storm ride up the East Coast at a pretty strong strength. So maybe even as far north as the Northeast might need to watch this in the future if this takes that track. But we still do see, along with some members, wanting to take pretty much direct impacts towards Florida. But the GFS model wants to take a track a little bit further westward. So still uncertainty with the forecast, but I'll make sure to keep you guys updated. But there seems to be a pretty much complete consensus that this will develop into a major hurricane or close to that once it enters the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Caribbean. Now, here's the model intensity guidance, and we do see that majority of the computer models want to take this to at least major hurricane status, which is definitely a major concern. And here's my forecast when it comes to potential Hurricane Hermine. So now I included Florida in the cone of uncertainty. So I do expect this to gradually intensify over the next several days and maybe reach hurricane status right around Sunday night into early Monday. And then I'd say past Sunday, that's when we should, this storm should undergo rapid intensification, where I'm expecting borderline a major hurricane to be right at Cuba, at Western Cuba's doorstep. So Cuba, you need to pay close attention to this. And I'm expecting even more strengthening once this approaches Florida. And Florida is in the cone of uncertainty. Hopefully this takes a track further eastward to where it doesn't impact anyone. But it's certainly looking increasingly likely that the United States will experience some sort of impacts associated with potential Hurricane Hermine, where we could see a major hurricane in our hands as it enters the Gulf of Mexico. So make sure to stay on high alert, and I'll keep you guys updated regarding any changes in the forecast. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. I hope you guys have a great day.